Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Now that we have the table off of the K&T horizontal mill, I want to turn my attention to the feed distribution box. The feed distribution box is a unit that's housed inside the knee that contains all of the gears and the levers for raising the knee, moving the saddle in and out, and moving the table left and right. For the most part, it's a self-contained unit and comes out in one piece. The first thing I need to do is set the feed gearbox to the lowest feed so that this tab will line up in the shaft so I can remove this gearbox off the side of the knee. I also need to loosen the trip rod stop blocks here for the cross feed. I didn't fully appreciate the significance of this until later, but I should have loosened these things a little bit better. I figured what I just needed to do was to loosen them and move them back a little bit away from the front of the knee, but what I really should have done is moved them all the way back to the very end of this trip rod. What I incorrectly thought was I just needed to get them out of the way so I could reach the screws for this gearbox, which are in there pretty tight. Those screws aren't budging, so resorting to one of my favorite tools here, and that's this impact screwdriver. This thing comes in handy more times than I thought I would need to use it. This top screw is proving to be just a little bit more difficult. I can't fit the impact screwdriver in there, and putting a wrench on this screwdriver is proving to be fruitless. Well, luckily I have just enough room to get an impact driver and a socket with a large flat blade bit on it, and I was able to get that screw out. Well, this is dowel penned to the side of the knee, so a few taps with a brass hammer and it should come right off. Well, I'm already seeing some not so good signs. The inside of this little gearbox has a bit of surface rust, and you can see on the accompanying bracket inside the knee that it's got quite a bit of surface rust on it. Well, the next thing I need to do is go ahead and remove all of the mounting bolts that hold the feed distribution box to the front of the knee. Well, this one was broken before. I already knew that. That'll need to get replaced. Well, before I pull this thing out, or at least try to, I want to lower the knee down as low as it can go. If for some unforeseen reason that this thing happens to break loose and it falls, I'd rather it fall the least distance to the concrete as possible. Well, similarly to how I removed the transmission from the side of the column, I'm going to use these same guide rods to pull the power feed box out, just again to be on the safe side. So this is how I understand that this is supposed to work. There's a screw that goes through the feed distribution box into the nut that's on the bottom of the saddle. If I put some wood blocks behind the saddle and start cranking on that screw, it should essentially push the feed distribution box out of the front of the knee. So I move the camera in here close to the seam between the feed distribution box and the knee, and as I crank you can see it's starting to come apart, but I'm facing with quite a bit of resistance. Well, I don't want to crank on this too hard because I don't want to break anything. I'm thinking it might just be doweled into place, and if I use a dead blow, that might help separate it a bit and get it to come loose. But upon closer inspection, I realized that I missed a bolt. It's really kind of hard to see with the knee down this low, but it was all the way down at the bottom center. Now when I turn that saddle screw, now you can really see the feed distribution box start to separate from the knee. But I'm still facing some resistance, and I'm starting to hear gears kind of click past each other, which is not sitting right with me. The other thing that's proving to be odd is once I get to a certain point, it's starting to engage like the power feed. So something is going weird here, and I can't quite explain it. It'll be smooth, and then all of a sudden it's like the power feed's engaged. Part of the problem that I'm having, of course, is I'm running a bit blind. I really don't know what the inside of this thing looks like. I have never seen one on YouTube, at least not of this era. I've never seen pictures of one, so I don't know what in the heck this thing is getting stuck on. I can see even through this small crack that there's some more evidence of rust. I'm thinking maybe something is just a little bit bound up, and a little bit of pressure on a pry bar might help loosen it. I'm going back and forth and trying to diagnose it. You can see here how it's running smooth, and then all of a sudden you see the table feed gears up here in the upper right of your screen. All of a sudden they start to move, and they start getting engaged as if the power feed's engaged. So again, I'm not sure what's going on here just yet, but I know this is not right, so I'm not going too far. So it seems like every time this happens, these power feed gears for the table feed start to engage and start moving. I'm not convinced that removing these things is going to solve anything, but I'm going to take them out anyway. Much like the bearing caps in an automobile differential, these caps are stamped. They go in a specific way and on a specific size. And I can see that either someone had done this before me, or maybe it was done this way at the factory. But one of them has 2 dings in it, and the other one has 1. And they are clearly marked that they are directional, and they go in one way and one way only. And before I can get these gears off, I need to take off the shifting yoke. That yoke is pinned to a shaft with a small bolt. And this rod comes out by threading a 1/4-20 bolt in the side of it and then just pulling it out the side of the saddle. With that shifter rod out of the way, I can pull these gears out and also the shifter yoke. Since I'm still thinking that this is some kind of a rust issue, I was almost at the point where I was going to reassemble everything, fill the knee full of kerosene, and run it for a while, hoping that that might knock some of this loose. I need to take a break and maybe think about this a little bit more and reach out to a friend that I'm sure has the answers.
Later that same evening.
Well, after speaking with my friend and actually showing him some video of what I was facing, he kept coming back to these trip rods, which are the two rods on the left side of the machine here. So although he didn't have the definitive answer, it certainly pointed me to the right direction, and that was a twofold problem. One of which was the rust, and the other were those stop blocks, and there's also a couple of set screws I didn't see. I need to go back now and get these stop blocks completely loose. I've always said that this channel is not a how to do it. It is what I did and what happened. And I hope this proves it. Those trip rods were essentially stuck into the front of the power feed box. There was no way for them to move. And the stop blocks were jamming up against the trip dog on the bottom of the saddle. And this half-broken set screw that I referred to before, I didn't see the last time. I didn't notice it. It was there, and I see it in the video as I'm playing it back. But it was preventing that stop block from moving back far enough to get out of the way. Well, with that set screw out, that stop block should move all the way toward the end of the rod, and it doesn't because there's something else I need to deal with. There's a little bit of a burr next to the hole on that set screw, so I've got some emery here to go ahead and smooth that out, and that should take care of it. So not really appreciating how this thing was really put together on the inside was really where I ran into problems. And what was really tripping me up, pun intended, were these rods not moving, and because they weren't moving, they were essentially pulling on the power feed engagement in the feed distribution box, which just led to a bunch of confusion. And here I'm thinking that there are gears that are meshing together that shouldn't be, and I'm going to end up snapping off a gear tooth. And what it really was these trip rods were working in reverse. They were engaging the power feed. And although that's not what I want to happen, it wasn't as destructive as it possibly could have been. Of course, here you can also see the extent of some of the rust here. It's coating just about everything. Even though all the gears still move rather freely, there is an awful lot of rust coating just about everything. Well, with that mystery solved and disaster averted, I can move on to getting this thing out of here and onto the workbench. Well, I've got a couple more of these studs that are in the mounting holes. I need to remove two of them so I can replace them with some homemade lifting eyes. This is just some 3/4 inch flat bar that I bent into a semi U shape, drilled on each end, and it'll fit a carriage bolt and a nut. I have this lifting strap I've been using on this project and others that'll thread through these little lifting eyes, and I can bring over the engine hoist. Well, the idea here is to use the engine hoist to take some of that weight off and then pull back the feed distribution box until it comes out of the knee. Again, I'm trying to be a little bit cautious here, so I put this milk crate and a block of wood underneath it. Again, if something were to happen and this breaks free, I want it falling the shortest distance and maybe not necessarily hitting the hardest of materials. Well, I've moved it out far enough that these long studs that I made are of no use anymore.
My goodness.
I want to get this a little bit more level, so I've got a ratchet strap that fits nicely over the end of the shaft. Hook it up to the same lifting hook here, and I can shorten this, get it nice and level so I can move it over to my bench. Well, with this thing up on the bench now, I can get a better idea of how much rust is inside this thing. The gears themselves and the screw and this other shaft actually don't look terrible. It almost as if the rust is concentrated on the casting itself. Well, in all honesty, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do at this point about this rust. If you've got some ideas, leave me a comment down below. There's some writing on the back there that might indicate that some new bearings were put in here in March of 1983. Even these gears up here underneath look clean and look good, but there's just a coating of rust on everything else. The inside of the knee isn't any better. There's a lot of surface rust on just about everything. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed coming along with me on this journey. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with this at this point, but I certainly do appreciate you watching. Like the video if you enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button so you can watch what happens next. See you on the next one. Thanks for watching.